6:15 before the regulators actually say you have to follow these rules. So we'll see. It's already having an effect.
Scott Patterson of the Wall Street Journal joining us to talk about the vocal rule. Mr. Patterson, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We go now to the House of Representatives.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., December 3, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Doug LaMalfa to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Congress returns for the final days of this year's session facing the same conundrum. People here and back home are divided over the direction of our government. They don't agree on how to fund what a growing and aging America needs. A year ago, we were engaged in a vigorous debate on taxation. Then, more recently, we survived the controversy surrounding the government shutdown, and we still are at loggerheads. There are strong feelings by some that now's not the time to raise taxes, yet the spending levels enshrined in the House budget cannot produce spending bills from the Appropriations Committee that can actually pass on the House floor. In some cases, they appear to not even be able to pass from subcommittee. All the while, we're looking at a sea of unmet needs and face a floundering economy. There is one area that can help break the logjam, not solve all our problems, certainly, but help us significantly along the way. Congress should address the critical needs of our nation's infrastructure deficit. Roads, bridges, transit systems are all increasingly at risk. We are facing an inadequate state of repair. Construction of new facilities are on hold, and we are losing ground in meeting our own needs, let alone the challenges of global competition. Yet this challenge is an opportunity for some potential progress. We know what to do to meet this challenge. We can write a new transportation bill that will meet today's needs. It just needs more money. There is a vast coalition that supports additional resources for infrastructure. The so-called special interests that are so often at odds are remarkably aligned when it comes time to recognize and fix this problem. Business, labor, professional groups, local government, environmentalists, truckers, bicyclists, all agree. The paralysis that surrounds questions of raising taxes does not necessarily need to apply in this case. Ronald Reagan, after all, was willing to sign into law a 5-cent gasoline tax increase 31 years ago when a nickel a gallon was real money. A user fee is, in fact, a different category from a general tax increase. The various groups that score such votes treat user fees differently. As we are attempting to resolve budget differences, there's an opportunity to embrace more transportation resources through user fee mechanisms that will have broad national support and not inspire the same fierce philosophical debate that has plagued and paralyzed our deliberations for years. It has the added benefit of being the fastest way to put hundreds of thousands of people to work at family wage jobs to help boost our flagging economy. I strongly urge my colleagues to take a step back and look at this as a way to crack the code, to meet vast unmet needs of our constituents and stabilize a critical part of our budget. Who knows? If we can find a way to thread this particular transportation funding needle, How many additional opportunities are us to solve problems going forward if we can address them? This is I think what it takes is simply some vision and some courage. That is why people sent us here in the first place. Congress should act demonstrating the leadership to avoid the worsening infrastructure deficit, put people to work, make our families safer, healthier, and more economically secure.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, during the Thanksgiving break, I wrote a letter to President Obama, which I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record.
Without objection.
The letter respectfully reminded the President that President Karzai continues to thumb his nose in the eyes of the American taxpayer. We have seen many news articles reporting Karzai's refusal to sign the bilateral strategic agreement that this administration has proposed, an agreement that would obligate United States money and United States troops for at least 10 more years in Afghanistan. An Associated Press article printed in my state paper titled, "Afghanistan President Delays Deal," the subtitle goes on to read, U.S. says it will pull out troops if security agreement isn't signed. Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that the House will encourage the President to pull our troops out and start spending money that we do not have in a country that does not even want our help. Furthermore, it's my hope that the House and Senate leadership will, in 2014, allow Congress to vote on this issue of the bilateral strategic agreement. Mr. Speaker, it is wrong that the Afghan parliament may vote on whether they want this agreement with the United States, but the House and the Senate that represent the American people can't even have a debate and to vote on the will of the American people. And I know that the American people want this debate to take place. So hopefully in 2014, the leadership of the House will at least let us have this debate on the floor of the House. Mr. Speaker, if you could have traveled with me during the break last week, you would have heard many, many people in the 3rd District of North Carolina who said to me they are outraged that we will continue spending money in Afghanistan at a time when we have so many financial needs at home. It is absolutely unacceptable that a single American would give his life or limb overseas without the approval of Congress. It is absolutely unacceptable that the American taxpayer would give money to a corrupt regime while young and old alike go hungry here in the United States. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say to the President, pull the troops out and bring them home now. There's not one thing history says we will ever change in Afghanistan. Nothing history says will change in Afghanistan. It is time to end the senseless waste of American lives and American money in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, this poster beside me was in the Greensboro newspaper where Mr. McGovern and I had written a letter saying that it's time to pull our troops out. Mr. Speaker, this poster says, News and Record, Greensboro, North Carolina, February the 27th of 2011. That's 3 years ago. We're still there, and we're talking about 10 more years. Let Congress debate. Let Congress speak. Let Congress vote the will of the American people. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time by asking God to please bless our men and women in uniform and to bless their families. And please, God, continue to bless America. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as winter descends upon the Middle East, the plight of Syria's people who have endured nearly 3 years of savage civil war grows more desperate with each passing day. Fighting rages on throughout much of the country, and with the government forces making headway in recent months, many of the rebel groups have splintered, turning on each other. As in wars throughout history, it is civilians, especially children, who have borne much of the suffering. More than 9 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance, and a quarter of these, 2.2 million, have fled the country, mostly to neighboring Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Half of those refugees, more than 1 million people, are children. Another 6.5 million Syrians are internally displaced, having fled their homes but remaining inside the country, often in parts of Syria that have changed hands on multiple occasions and with attendant civilian suffering. While all of Syria's people have been affected by the fighting, it is Christians who make up about 10% of the country's population who are at greatest risk, given their small numbers and the increasingly religious nature of a war that started out as a broad-based secular movement that sought to change the character of the Syrian regime, but not the regime itself. For 2 millennia, Syria has been home to one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, a population dominated by the Eastern churches, but also including smaller numbers of Catholics and Protestants. Syria's Christians have been comfortably and fully integrated into the economic, political, and cultural life of modern Syria, and despite their small numbers, are well represented among the country's elite. Tragically, this long, peaceful coexistence has been shattered, and 500,000 Syrian Christians, nearly 1 in 4, have fled the country since the fighting began. Like minorities the world over, Syrian Christians have tried to avoid getting dragged into the fighting that has gripped their homeland. But with their top 2 population centers, Aleppo and Homs, having seen some of the most savage fighting in the war, Christians have been unable to avoid being drawn into the conflict. While the uprising against Syrian President Bashar Assad did not start out as a sectarian conflict, it has increasingly taken on a religious tone, as many of the rebels have wrapped themselves in the mantle of fundamentalist Islam. Initially, the Free Syrian Army and other large rebel groupings distanced themselves from the more religious rebel factions, some of whom are linked to al-Qaeda, but even they have adopted an increasingly Islamist tone in recent months. This has exacerbated the plight of the Christians, who are increasingly targeted simply because they are Christian and because they are seen by many Muslims as having backed the government. The truth is that Syrian Christians, many of whom have family members among my Armenian American constituents, did not rally to the regime. Syrian Christians, like most other Syrians, simply wanted a freer, more open society and a greater voice in their own government. It is a testament to the depth of Christian desperation that atrocities perpetrated by radical Islamists have done more to test Christian neutrality than the use of chemical weapons and war crimes by the Assad regime. Ending the civil war through a negotiated solution represents the best prospect for peace, and the international community must insist that any agreement reached at the upcoming peace talks in Geneva or thereafter will guarantee the safety of Syria's minority populations. In the meantime, America can do more to help those seeking refuge. That's why I've been working for much of the past year to convince the administration to allow humanitarian parole for the nearly 6,000 Syrians with approved immigrant petitions to the United States. As hundreds of millions around the world prepare to celebrate the most joyful day of the Christian calendar, the international community must intensify its efforts to end this terrible war, and also to protect Syria's Christians and to ensure the continued vitality of this 2,000-year-old community. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the innovativeness of American enterprise flies off the radar. According to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, the company is fixing to deliver packages to its customers via drones. It's called Amazon Prime Air. That's right. In just a few years, he says people will be able to order something online and have it in their hands within 30 minutes by the use of drones. Sounds like something out of the Jetsons, doesn't it? Gone will be the days of the neighborhood mail carriers. Soon there will be a drone to replace them. According to Amazon, these drones could deliver packages up to 5 pounds, which makes up 90% of their deliveries. Mr. Speaker, thousands of Americans use Amazon every year, especially around the holiday season. Amazon, unlike the glitch-ridden government websites, can efficiently use online internet services that get a timely product to market. Think of how many drones could soon be flying around the skies. Here a drone, there a drone, everywhere a drone in the United States. Mr. Speaker, Amazon is just one of many companies that will be looking to take advantage of this cost-effective drone technology in the coming years. And good for Amazon. I congratulate them. The FAA is charged with the responsibility of coming up with ways to regulate drones for safety reasons. But who's watching out for the privacy of American citizens? Congress has the responsibility and the duty to set clear regulations for all drones in domestic use. Absent legislation to prevent surveillance, of Americans, companies, could use drones not only for delivery but other ways that, in my opinion, violate the constitutional right of privacy. The issue of concern, Mr. Speaker, is surveillance, not the delivery of packages. That includes surveillance of someone's backyard, snooping around with a drone, checking out a person's patio to see if that individual could buy or needs a new patio furniture from the company, photographing swing sets, pools, or the people that are in the pools, or even looking into windows. All of that could be done with the use of drones under corporate America or by individuals. And this would all be possible. So Congress must ensure that the expanded use of drones in the coming years does not come at the expense of the individual right of privacy. After all, this is a right guaranteed to all Americans in the Fourth Amendment. That's why I have, along with Representative Zoe Lofgren, introduced the bipartisan Preserving American Privacy Act. Our bill would deal with several things. And once again, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about regulating surveillance and set guidelines for the expectation of privacy for citizens. It would first of all deal with the government. It would prohibit the government from using drones for targeted surveillance of an individual or their property without a search warrant. The Fourth Amendment applies to the use of drones when the government is involved. But it would also prohibit individuals or companies from using drones to take photographs or audio recordings or other of private individuals without their consent. This is private surveillance or spying or snooping, whatever you want to call it. It would restrict private individuals and law enforcement agencies from arming drones, which can be done. As we enter this uncharted world of drone technology, Congress must be proactive and establish boundaries for drone use that safeguard the constitutional rights of Americans and not leave this up to the FAA. Individuals are somewhat concerned that these new eyes in the skies may threaten their privacy. So Congress can and should immediately balance this high-tech development with our constitutional right of privacy. Boundaries are needed before drones flood the skies of America. And just because Big Brother or individuals or companies can look into someone's backyard or through a window of a house doesn't mean it should be allowed. As the innovativeness of American enterprise flies off the radar, we should be mindful that technology may change, but the Constitution does not. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes.
My remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I want to welcome all of my colleagues back from their Thanksgiving holiday, and I trust that, like me, everybody had a great Thanksgiving along with a wonderful meal. But I'm here today to remind my colleagues so that they don't forget that for millions of our fellow citizens, they went without a Thanksgiving dinner. In fact, for millions of our fellow citizens, they go without meals on a regular basis, men, women, and children. Close to 50 million Americans go hungry in our country, the richest country in the history of the world. And it's a national scandal, and it is something that we need to do something about. Mr. Speaker, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP, helps struggling families put food on the table. It's a good program that sadly has come under attack by some, not all, but by some of my Republican friends. And for the life of me, I can't understand why. You know, the average SNAP benefit is about $1.40 per meal. The No Kid Hungry campaign, launched by the group Share Our Strength, recently did a chart which shows that the average cost of one Thanksgiving dinner is about $49.04. That's equal to about 35 SNAP meals. And the fact is that our food banks are at capacity. You know, I went to a Thanksgiving dinner sponsored by my bishop that was filled with people looking for food. That same group, run by the Catholic Charities, delivered, you know, well over 1,000 meals to people in my community on that one Thanksgiving day. But the notion that somehow charity can do it all, or that food banks can do it all, or that churches or synagogues or mosques can do it all is just wrong. I would urge my colleagues to visit a food bank, to visit a food pantry. Talk to the people who run those organizations and let them inform you of who's showing up at their doorsteps. Talk to the people who go to these food banks. You know, these are average people. Many of them are working families who earn so little that they still qualify for the SNAP benefit. The White House released a report over the Thanksgiving holiday talking about the importance of the Nutrition Assistance Program. The report highlights, among other things, that in 2012, SNAP kept nearly 5 million people out of poverty, including 2.2 million children. SNAP reduced child poverty by 3.0% percentage points in 2012, the largest child poverty impact of any safety net program other than refundable tax credits. The program benefits are targeted to those most in need and designed to support work. The large majority of SNAP participants are children, the elderly, or people with disabilities. And about 95% of federal spending on SNAP goes directly to subsidizing the food purchases of eligible households. It is one of the most efficiently run federal programs. I wish the Department of Defense was run as efficiently as this. Our deficit would be much lower. But among SNAP households with at least one working-age, non-disabled adult, more than half work, and more than 80% work in the year before or after receiving SNAP. Now, the legislation that the House Republican leadership rammed through this Congress and is now part of a negotiation on the Farm Bill will cut the program by close to $40 billion. That would result in nearly 4 million Americans losing access to SNAP next year, including working families with children, seniors, and veterans. Nearly 170,000 veterans would lose their benefits. In addition, 210,000 children in these families would also lose free school meals. These cuts would come on top of the significant benefit reduction already experienced by all SNAP recipients as a result of the American Recovery Act monies running out. And I would say to my colleagues that what that cut that went into effect on November 1st means is that the average family of four would see a reduction of about $36 per month in their SNAP benefit. We're talking about food. We're talking about making sure in the richest country in the history of the world that nobody goes hungry. And I know that these are tough budgetary times, but if you want to find ways to save money, I would suggest we listen to my colleague, Mr. Jones of North Carolina, and get the hell out of Afghanistan. Stop supporting one of the most corrupt regimes on this planet today, the Karzai regime. Take those millions and those billions and reinvest it here at home. Reinvest it in a way that we end hunger now. Mr. Speaker, for millions of our citizens who are hungry, what they worry about and what they fear is not halfway around the world. It is halfway down the block. And we ought to make sure we get a farm bill that does not make hunger worse in this country. And if we have a farm bill that cuts SNAP significantly, I would urge all my colleagues to not only vote against it, but fight against it. We can do better. Let's get a farm bill, but let's not make hunger worse. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to condemn the recent actions taken by the Ukrainian government on its own citizens. A couple of weeks ago, I stood here hopeful, urging their government to look westward as they entered the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. While Georgia and Moldova have moved forward in signing association agreements with the European Union, the government of Ukraine failed to sign this agreement. This move is disappointing, even more so for the Ukrainian citizens who long for a closer tie with Europe. Due to President Yanukovych's lack of action, Ukrainians have taken to the streets in protest and have been met with extreme brutality. I join with the State Department in urging the Ukrainian government to respect the rights of its people and allow freedom of expression and assembly. Ukraine should not bully or take violent action if they desire to be peaceful and a democratic nation. I will continue to support the citizens of Ukraine as they pursue democracy and freedom in their country. It is my wish that Ukraine will seek other means of integration with Europe and not fall to demands and pressure from Russia. It is time to look to the future, not to the Soviet-style rule that has plagued their past for countless years. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it has been reported that J.P. Morgan Chase has agreed to a $13 billion settlement of the civil suit filed by the United States Department of Justice and the Federal Housing Financing Agency in order to resolve several investigations into their mortgage securities finagling. J.P. Morgan and its affiliates knowingly misrepresented the value and quality of their mortgage bonds that it sold to the Housing Finance Agency. Compared to the trillions that Wall Street banks have extracted in home equity from the American people, a $13 billion settlement with J.P. Morgan Chase doesn't come close to repaying the American people what they are owed back. More cases need to be filed to mete out justice and recoup what has been taken. Of the $13 billion settlement, $4 billion will be for the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which will go to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. How that filters down to the street, to the ordinary homeowner, we can't predict. $2 billion will be credited through J.P. Morgan's reduction of principal on mortgages in areas hardest hit by foreclosures like Detroit and cities like Cleveland and Toledo in Ohio. J.P. Morgan Chase currently holds, get this, nearly 1 million mortgages, 208,000 mortgages considered seriously delinquent, and in excess of 700,000 which are underwater. That's too much power over our marketplace in too few hands. $500 million of the settlement will be credited for the removal of blight from neighborhoods through demolition, reducing interest rates and offering new loans to low-income borrowers. My goodness, every community in America could use some of that. That's very little money for a very big hole. This settlement may appear like a big step. It's a small step in the right direction. However, let me put these figures on the record. Last year, J.P. Morgan Chase made $21.3 billion in profits, and that doesn't count what's in their reserves. A settlement of $13 billion, therefore, is barely half of what J.P. Morgan made in all of last year after expenses. In fact, this settlement of $13 billion is equal to exactly half of what they had already set aside, $26 billion, for legal fees since 2010. And by the way, they make that money by charging all of us. Moreover, the settlement will also be largely tax deductible for the bank as well. Although the tax law does not allow fines or penalties paid to the federal government to be tax deductible, that only accounts for $2 billion of the settlement that the bank has to pay in civil penalties to settle their legal claims. That leaves $7 billion in compensatory damages that the bank could claim, guess what, in tax deductibles. Imagine that. This greatly reduces the impact this settlement has on correcting their bad behavior and mitigating the damages it has to pay in the lawsuit. Imagine if homeowners were allowed to deduct the damages they have incurred as a result of Wall Street's misbehavior. Here are some figures to ponder. Over the last couple years, the CEO of J.P. Morgan has taken home anywhere from $23 million plus bonuses, plus stock options on an annual basis. Mary Erdos, their CEO of their asset managed division, last year it was reported was paid $15 million plus $5 million in bonuses. This is before they've settled all of these mortgages that they hold belonging to the American people. Matthew Zanes, their co-chief CEO, they call him, $17 million plus $6 million in bonuses. And Daniel Pinto, $17 million in salary alone, plus $8 million in bonuses, not counting all their stock options, cars, you know, all the things that they're given. The American people are really sick of this. They really want justice. We need more cases filed, and Congress should reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act by passing H.R. 129, the Return to Prudent Banking Act of 2013, to ensure that what caused the financial crisis, too much power in too few hands, the power to create money irresponsibly, so our country no longer has to endure this kind of collapse because of the mistakes that they made. Mr. Speaker, I think it's time for community after community to take a look at those legal cases that have been successful in extracting repayment to communities and to families across our country. Our U.S. attorneys, our housing organizations across this country, those attorney generals who are awake in our 50 states, we need to go after the source that created the collapse that our communities are still suffering from, to hold them accountable for the mortgages they still hold, and to recoup to millions and millions of our people the home equity that was taken from them so cruelly. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall, for 5 minutes.
Speaker, request 5 minutes to address the floor and revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address the floor on a subject that Republicans and Democrats agree upon. Several of the previous speakers have done so, and that's the idea of freedom for this country. But I rise today to pay special attention to and give tribute to one of our nation's and World War II's great war heroes, Audie Murphy. Major Murphy, who hailed from the 4th District of Texas, my district, was an extraordinary man in many ways, initially turned away by several branches of the United States Armed Services due to his young age and his slight build. Audie Murphy's patriotism led him to misrepresent his age in order to serve and defend his country. The patriotism and his unusual courage in battle led him to distinction as the most decorated combat soldier of World War II. Earning every U.S. military combat award for valor available from the United States Army, including the Medal of Honor, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Distinguished Service Cross. It's therefore fitting, though belated, that Major Murphy was awarded Texas' highest military honor, the Texas Legislative Medal of Honor, on October 29, 2013. Major Murphy earned his first Medal of Honor on January 26, 1945 in France. 6 tanks and waves of Nazi infantry attacked his Company B, but 2nd Lieutenant Murphy remained at his command post throughout the fierce fighting. Although he suffered a leg wound, he continued to fight for more than an hour until his ammunition was exhausted and the enemy was in retreat. Audie Murphy did not stop wishes and did not stop battling when most men would have on the battlefield and fighting for his own life and the life of his country. In fact, he lived out the remainder of his years after the war as an accredited writer, actor, and songwriter. Mr. Speaker, despite this prestige, it should be noted that he was also a man of deep modesty who considered himself, quote, just another man, unquote. He fought not because he loved war, but because he loved the values and freedoms we enjoy in America. He felt compelled to do his duty for his country. Audie Murphy represents some of the greatest qualities of a hero, including an unfailing sense of duty, a strong sense of patriotism, and a degree of modesty that recognizes the humble roots of this great country. We remember Audie Murphy because of his outstanding feats, but also because he remains perhaps one of the truest examples of what it means to be American. I was proud to ride in many veterans' parades with Audie Murphy and pleased to know him as a personal friend. I also met his sisters. He was always loyal to his family and found time for them. As a representative of the 4th District of Texas, I'm proud to call Audie Murphy's home my home as well. The folks in the 4th District are pleased the great state of Texas has given Major Murphy due recognition for his outstanding service to our country by awarding him the Texas Legislative Medal of Honor. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to join me in remembering this great American, this great hero, and thanking him for his family for his service. I yield back now. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was just about a year ago right now that I and 84 other new members of Congress arrived in Washington to begin our orientation in the process of joining this body. And we, I think, Democrats and Republicans of that class of 2012, received, though we come from different perspectives in different districts, we received a pretty strong message from the electorate in 2012. It was the same message that I think many of us heard when we were back home last week for our Thanksgiving break. The message was, set aside the hyperpartisanship and get about the business of attending to the work of the American people. And so now, as we face yet another set of self-inflicted wounds, political deadlines that have been set. We hear some rumblings that we may not do what we committed to do just a few weeks ago, and that is put together a real budget that is a reflection of the values and the interests and the needs of the American people. We've already gone through one government shutdown in just this last year, which cost the American economy $24 billion. We cannot afford to let that happen again, and we cannot afford another short-term deal that does not provide the stability and the certainty that the private sector needs in order to make the kind of investments that will put the American people back to work and get our economy moving again. I am glad that there finally was agreement to go to conference on a budget. And many of us took that agreement at face value. We took the members who agreed to that and the leadership at their word, that it would be an effort to put together a budget that is a reflection of the needs and the values of the American people, a budget that will invest in our kids, that will give them the skills that they need in order to compete, that will invest in infrastructure, that will help industry deliver products to market and grow the economy, that will invest in manufacturing by passing the Make It in America plan, a plan of some 40 bills that would reinvigorate our manufacturing sector in this country. And we can do it. We can do it without slashing important programs, simply by being more rational in terms of how we manage our budget. Cut the big tax loopholes for big oil and corporations that pay virtually no taxes in this country. And for sure, Mr. Speaker, to end this mindless sequester, a scheme that was designed to be so bad that it would force the two parties together around a more rational approach to making decisions for the American people. But instead of that, it has now been embraced by some in Congress, not as something to be avoided, but as the starting point for the next round of cuts to the essential programs that we need in order to drive investment and grow our economy. We just cannot afford to continue down this path. According to the CBO, sequestration is already costing us jobs. Up to 1.6 million Americans are out of work or will be out of work because of these mindless cuts. And we're further cutting our safety net. Programs like SNAP, unemployment, those things that we need in order to make sure that we have a floor of decency below which no American should ever be allowed to fall in the world's biggest, most powerful democracy and economy. It's unacceptable. These cuts also hurt our future by slashing key investment in research at the NIH, trying to crack the code and solve some of the most difficult problems that we have in the diseases that so many Americans are struggling with. Yet we set aside that investment in the name of partisan politics. We've got to get back to work. We've got to get back to the work that we were sent here to do. Because I think the 85 of us that came in last year at this time are not really that much different than the rest of the members of this House. We were all sent here with that charge to get the business of the American people done. But somewhere along the way, partisanship has overcome democracy. We need to set aside this hyper-partisanship, get back to the business that we were sent here to do, and do the work of the American people, pass a budget. I'm calling on my colleagues to do that and to not be drawn into what could be another partisan squabble for political purposes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor Eric Cowden, a resident of Pennsylvania Furnace, Pennsylvania, constituent of mine. This past month, Eric, a graduate of Penn State University, was recognized by the National Future Farmers of America with the organization's highest honor, the FFA Honorary American degree. As a youngster growing up on the family farm in Washington County, Pennsylvania, Eric was involved with the FFA like many students in rural communities, showing steers, heifers, and lambs from a young age. Upon graduating from Penn State with a degree in agricultural sciences and earning his master's in business from Delaware Valley College, Eric went on to work for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. There he administered the Rural Youth Grant Program, led the County Fair and Agritourism Division, and eventually rose to the Director of the Central Region Office for that department. Eric also holds several leadership roles within the Marcellus Shale Coalition, bringing together two of Pennsylvania's most historic and important industries, energy and agriculture. Eric is well deserving of this honor, and we thank him for his leadership in the field of agriculture and agricultural education. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On February 15, a small group of Democratic members of the House joined together to form the Safe Climate Caucus. We vowed to come to the House every day to talk about the defining environmental challenge of our time, climate change. Today marks the 100th day we have spoken on the House floor. The Safe Climate Caucus is composed of representatives from across this country. We come from the West Coast, the East Coast, the North and the South and the Midwest. We come from coastal regions, urban areas, and rural communities. We represent a cross-section of America. We started the Safe Climate Caucus because of the enormous disconnect that exists between what scientists are telling us about the dangers of climate change and the conspiracy of silence and denial that exists in this House. There is a mountain of evidence that climate change is real and a dangerous threat to the future of our children and grandchildren, yet this body refuses to accept scientific reality. I wish my Republican colleagues would open their eyes and escape their congressional bubble. Firefighters across the West know that fires are getting bigger and more dangerous. Farmers in the Midwest know that droughts and floods are becoming more common and more intense. Coastal communities know that rising sea levels and extreme storms threaten their very existence. And just last month, a super typhoon, perhaps the strongest ever recorded, demolished entire cities in the Philippines. Extreme weather, sea level rise, heat waves, droughts, flooding, wildfires, pests, that is what climate change looks like. So what is this House doing? Denying, obstructing, and weakening the Clean Air Act. In June, the International Energy Agency warned that if we don't act now, avoiding catastrophic climate change will cost trillions of dollars. In October, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change concluded that the evidence that the Earth is warming is unequivocal. This is the same level of confidence that scientists have that smoking causes cancer. Last month, the World Meteorological Association reported that levels of heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere set new records, reaching concentrations higher than any in the last 800,000 years. Yet this House ignores it all. We challenge the Republicans on the Energy and Commerce Committee to come to the floor and debate us, defend their record of inaction. They never showed up. The committee won't even hold a hearing to listen to the scientists. Democrats are in the minority, so we can't call hearings. But we won't be muzzled. Since February, the members of the Safe Climate Caucus reported on the alarms that the scientists are sounding. In fact, today marks the 100th legislative day that members from the Safe Climate Caucus have spoken out. Except during the Republican shutdown of the government, our members have come to the floor every day we have been in session. It has not always been easy to keep this streak of speeches alive, but we have come because of the commitment of our 31 members to take action before it is too late. We are speaking out because we have a duty to our neighbors, to our children and our grandchildren. We know when future generations look back at these times, they won't remember the debates we've had on the deficit. They won't remember the debates we've had on boosting oil drilling. What they will want to know is whether we acted to protect the world from catastrophic climate change while we still had time. And they will want to know whether we made the investments we need to make the United States the world leader in the clean energy technologies of the future. We are at a critical juncture, and I urge all members to join with the Safe Climate Caucus in ensuring we make the right choices for our future and for our economy.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Mrs. Black, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since Obamacare implementation began on October the 1st, the President has spent much of his time talking about the malfunctioning website. However, I would remind the President of his own words several weeks ago. Obamacare is more than just a website. The website was supposed to be the easy part, and the more people sign on to it, they will be made aware of the real problems with Obamacare. In fact, when the millions of Americans currently losing their health care plans try to log on to healthcare.com or healthcare.gov, they will be met with drastically increased premiums, skyrocketing out-of-pocket costs, and reduced access to the doctors and the hospitals they know. These problems are in direct contrast to the repeated promises made by the President. My constituents are rightly concerned with these broken promises, and they are regularly contacting me and my office to voice their concerns. For instance, Jillian in Sparta, Tennessee wrote to me, and I quote, "Every year in the past, my health care insurance has increased by small percentages, sometimes 5%, sometimes by 7%. This past week, I received my new premiums for 2014. They increased by 250%. Same plan, same coverage, same insurance company," she said. And Jillian isn't alone. Nearly 3 times as many Americans say they have been hurt rather than helped by the Obamacare, according to a recent poll. This from a law that the President promised would lower insurance premiums by as much as $2,500. Mr. Speaker, Obamacare is much more than a website. It's an unmitigated disaster. The effects of this law are wreaking havoc on our health care system and exposing the President's broken promises to the Americans across this country. My House Republican colleagues and I have tried repeatedly to protect Americans from this law, but the only way to do so is for Democrats to join us. For instance, the Senate can act right now to pass the Fairness for American Families Act that was passed out of the House this summer. This legislation would give fairness under Obamacare by delaying the law's mandate for people, not just businesses. The President may be all in on his health care law, but that doesn't mean the congressional Democrats need to follow him off of the cliff. As disapproval of Obamacare continues to rise, I ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to distance themselves from Obamacare and join us by trying to protect the American people from this law's disastrous effects. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Negrete McLeod, for 5 minutes.
I have permission to speak.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As budget negotiations move forward, Congress must remain committed to work in a bipartisan manner to find reasonable solutions to create jobs, expand the economy, and strengthen the middle class, while continuing to reduce the deficit in a responsible way. To do so, Congress must lift the across-the-board sequester cuts that are inflicting damage to communities across the nation. There is no question that we need to cut the deficit, but we should do so without cutting programs that seniors, veterans, small business owners, students, and our children rely on. In California, it is estimated that with sequestration, more than 15,000 children will not receive vaccinations for diseases such as measles, whooping cough, and influenza, and 8,200 children will be eliminated from federally funded early childhood education programs such as Head Start. This is unacceptable, and Congress must fix it. After the extensive damage done by the government shutdown that cost the economy, according to an assessment by Standard & Poor's, $24 billion, we must avoid another shutdown and another crisis by passing a budget that does away with sequestration. Americans cannot afford budget policies that weakens our economy, squeezes the middle class, and costs hundreds of thousands of jobs. Congress needs to come to a compromise on a real spending plan that will increase revenue rather than slashing critical programs. Congress needs to make sure that Medicare and Medicaid are protected and strengthened. Mr. Speaker, I stand ready to support a common-sense, job-creating budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And the House returns today at noon Eastern for legislative work. Up to 10 bills under consideration, including one that would extend the ban on manufacture, sale, or possession of firearms that aren't detectable by metal detectors. The 25-year ban, which had been reauthorized twice, is set to expire next week, December 10th. Lawmakers will also take up a number of land bills today, several measures dealing with the aviation industry, including one that would require the TSA to suspend all loose change collected at airport security checkpoints on lounges for members of the military and their families. We'll have live House coverage when they return here on C-SPAN. And at the White House today, President Obama is holding a meeting with the President of Colombia. According to the White House, the two leaders will talk about